So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us also direct attention to our common interest and the means by which those differences can be resolved. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. And we are all mortal.
One of the finest speeches I think any politician has ever given. Just a little reminder of JFK himself. Right, I'm going to talk about someone who became a good friend of mine, and I knew him for 15 years. Unfortunately, he died last year. Can you all hear me, by the way?
Yes.
This is pretty much his personal story. I don't have any sort of smoking guns or any revelations to offer you today, but really it's just a record of his personal quest to try and get an historical accuracy, because as it will unfold, you'll find out, if you don't already know, what Harold Rydberg did back in 1964. This is Harold Rydberg. In 1962, he joined the Bethesda Navy Medical School as a medical illustrator, or trained as a medical illustrator. This was taken around about 1964. Well, he was born in Chicago, raised in Sarasota in Florida, and he joined the US Navy as a hospital callsman. That's sort of like a medic. You know, he did all the medical training up to and just below becoming a doctor. Although he's not a doctor, or he never became a doctor, he knew most of the medical procedures that doctors know, so he was able to converse with doctors and they could understand each other. He joined the Navy in 1958, and then a nurse actually saw him doing some drawings, and she was quite impressed with what he was doing, and said, "There's a medical illustration school at Bethesda, why don't you try and see if you can get in there, because you know you've obviously got the talent for it." And he did, and he got in 1962, and he went through the training, and within a year he was appointed the actual senior medical illustrator, so he was quite a fast learner. These are a couple of, by the way, I'm going to be showing you some actual original documents which Skip sent to me shortly before he died. These are actual original certificates that he got during his training, and many of the documents I'm going to be showing you today are in this folder. So if anybody wants to have a closer look at them, you're more than welcome to. Just have a look later on when you get a chance. But these are just some certificates that he achieved. Now these were from 1963. On the day of the assassination, he was teaching a class of 4 students at Bethesda the muscle system, and this is the drawing that he did of the adult male muscle system, which I think is quite an impressive drawing. He was never happy with the drawings he did for the Warren Commission, but this one he was quite pleased with, and I can understand why. Anyway, this is what the Navy Medical Centre looked like in 1963. On the day of the assassination, as I say, he was teaching 4 students. They heard about the assassination, he stopped the class, and he said, "I can't really do any teaching today after hearing this tragic news." And later on that day, and all the enlisted men were ordered to put their ceremonial uniforms on, what they call the dress blues, and they all lined up. That you can't really see it in that people. That is an actual semicircular drive that goes around the front of Bethesda, and he was standing just on the right, probably just outside the picture, when the entourage and the motorcade come from Andrews Air Force Base with Jackie Kennedy, Bobby, and all the others, with apparently the coffin with Kennedy in it, but actually based anyway. And he actually saw the coffin arrive, and he saw the entourage get out the front of the hospital, which is where those cars are, just below the tall building. And the actual ambulance that the coffin was supposed to be in stood outside the front for about 10 minutes before it was driven around the back. Now, many of you probably know that one of the autopsy technicians, the X-ray technicians, had already taken X-rays of Kennedy's body when he witnessed the arrival of Jackie Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, which is another mystery. But I'm not going to go into that now. I'm going to concentrate on Skip Rydberg's experience, because he wasn't at the autopsy, so he doesn't have personal experience. Right, this is Captain John Stover. He's the commanding officer of the Navy Medical School. On March the 13th, 1964, Rydberg was called into his office because he was needed to assist Humes and Boswell in their upcoming testimony before the Warren Commission. They needed medical illustrations to illustrate their testimony before the Commission, because they weren't allowed to use the photographs or the X-rays, and they had to show the Commission members something that they could look at and describe what they did during the autopsy. Well, he put him under secret orders, and this is the document that he had to sign. And he says, at the top he says, "You're hereby assigned special duty of a nature which you will require your utmost attention to the duties to be described to you. And you mustn't talk about it except amongst these four people," and that was Stover, Hughes, Boswell and Flint, the autopsy surgeons. "And if you do, you're liable to court-martial." So basically, this was a threat. They were threatening the court-martial if he talked about what he did on that weekend. Now, he had to have a cover story, in case anybody asked him what he was doing that weekend. And now, this was his cover story. A nuclear submarine sank in 1963 in April off the coast of Boston, and that was his cover story, that he was working on diagrams and so on to help in the recovery of that particular submarine. These are the three autopsy surgeons. The two on the left, Boswell and James, they were actually stationed at the medical centre. And the guy on the right, Lieutenant Colonel Pierre Fink, he came from the Walter Reed Hospital. He was a ballistics expert, the only one that had any real forensic pathological experience. The other guys were basically administrators. You know, they had a bit of forensic pathology study during their career, but he was the only one that really knew anything about forensic pathology, which you're looking for, you know, in a legal case, essentially. But it was Humes. Humes was in charge of the autopsy, and Fink didn't arrive until about 8:30 that evening anyway. The autopsy was well underway, so he basically just sort of was there just to assist Humes. Humes was in charge, and Boswell was assisting Humes as well. Anyway, these are the drawings that Skip did that weekend. Now they were published in the Warren Commission, 26 volume, volume 16, I believe, in black and white, in monochrome. They're not very good reproductions, but they were actually done in watercolour. So this is how they actually looked when he did them back in '64. Now I remember Skip told me that on the Monday morning, just before they would get taken to where they were going to be shown to the commission members, they were stood around in an office against the wall, and Humes, Boswell, Stover and Rydberg were all standing looking at these drawings, and I think it was Humes, he looked at these and he said, "Yeah, I think we can get by with these," you know, which was quite a telling statement, I think. But there's problems with these illustrations. Now you have to remember, this is back in 1964, I know that the Warren Report was published in September of '64. The autopsy photographs were not available to the public, so the only illustrations that anybody could see was these three drawings. Now if you look at this one, Commission Exhibit 386, and you compare it with an autopsy photograph, which eventually came out, I think in the 80s, the bullet wound in the neck, as shown in the drawing, is obviously much higher than the actual bullet wound in the back. So that's one example of how inaccurate these drawings are and how misleading they are. That's another one. Skip's drawing shows Kennedy's head tilted quite, dramatically forward to give the impression that the bullet came from the 6th floor depository. But if you look at the Zapruder film frame, the one just before the headshot, and match Skip's drawing with the Zapruder frame, you can see it couldn't possibly have come from the book depository. And this other one, this is even more telling. This is Skip's drawing. And this one was done by a medical illustrator called Ida Docks. This is exhibit JFK 65 for the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 78. And you can see she has placed the wounds much higher than the original drawing that Rydberg did. So they both can't be right. So it's another example of how misleading these drawings are. Right, it's something, I was reading this again quite recently, and the full impact of what you're going to read now didn't really hit me until then, and it's actually an amazing statement to make. This was a memo that Arnold Spector wrote to J.D. Rankin, who was the chief lawyer for the Warren Commission, in 1964, April the 30th, 1964. The Commission should determine with certainty that there are no major variations between the films and the artist's drawings, Skip's drawings. These Commission exhibits were made from the recollections of the autopsy surgeons. Basically, they told him what to draw. He had he wasn't at the autopsy, he didn't have any photograph, it was literally verbal instructions. But then he makes this really incredible statement when you consider that the photograph and the true nature of the wound didn't come out until many years later. He was a very astute man. He knew there was going to be something wrong, because he said in the same memo, someday someone may compare the films with the artist's drawings and find a significant error which might substantially affect the essential testimony and the Commission's conclusions. I think that's an incredible statement, because that's exactly what's happening. People do question these drawings. Then he goes on to say, I suggest that the Commission transmits to the Attorney General, which was Bobby Kennedy, its reasons for wanting the films. They wanted them for the sole purpose of corroborating or correcting the drawings, with the film not to become part of the Commission's records. So, and the inspector asked Humes, he's asking Humes during his testimony, would it be helpful to the artist in redefining the drawings if that should become necessary to have available to him the photographs or x-rays of the present? And Humes replies, if it were necessary to have them absolutely true to scale. If it was necessary to have them true to scale, this was probably the autopsy of the century. It was absolutely crucial, vital to have them true to scale. I think it would be virtually impossible for him to do this without the photographs. And Spector asked him, what is the reason for the necessity of having the photographs? And I've read this, I can't make it head nor tail, you can read this. If you can understand this, you're a better person than I, basically. But the important part is the last part of his reply. I cannot transmit completely to the illustrator where the wounds were situated. And why did they use these drawings? Even Humes himself, Spector, they knew they were worthless. But even knowing that they're worthless, and knowing that when the photographs were eventually going to come out, sooner or later, it would question the Commission's conclusion, and yet they still used them, which was a part of a glowing example of the cover-up that the Warren Commission was actually. These are three drawings that Rydberg drew in 1977. He donated to the 6th floor museum. He drew these based on his own personal research. He never did see the photographs, never saw the x-rays, And even he doubts whether these are actually accurate as well. So, but you know, these were something he did later on. By the way, he donated these to the Sixth Floor Museum, as I say, in 1989, and many years later we asked if he could have them back. And what the Sixth Floor Museum said, well, you had to sign a document stating that you give over all rights to this donation. You know, and you basically, they now belong to the Sixth Floor Museum. In other words, you can't give them back. And they wouldn't let them back. I don't see why, you know. So if you do go to the Sixth Floor Museum, remember that they're not after giving the truth out, I think. He actually used one of the drawings in his book that he wrote. This is a novel based on his own personal research. It's very difficult to get hold of. I'm trying to get hold of the copy because his granddaughter wants to get hold of the copy, and it's very difficult because it's out of print. And if anybody knows where I can get hold of a second copy, have a word with me later on, and if it's not too expensive, I'll take it with you. Anyway, this is a group of people. On the left there's Captain Stover. The Skip Rydberg is second from the right. I don't know the other two guys in the middle, but this guy is being presented with a certificate by Stover. But it's a chap on the right. Anybody know who that chap is?
Pizza.
You know?
Pizza.
Pizza. William. Lieutenant Commander William Bruce Pizza. Now, he was the chief of the educational television division of the Navy Medical School. He had a TV studio. And sometimes they had a closed-circuit television camera in the morgue where autopsies were taking place. And they transmitted pictures to places like the Walter Reed Hospital. But it's interesting as far as this Kennedy goes, because this guy, Dennis David, who was a Navy corpsman at Bethesda, on the 22nd he was chief of the day. He was like sort of an administrator. He looked after security for the hospital after hours. And the officer of the day, because they always had to have an officer who was in charge of everybody, and that happened to be Boswell. Now, Dennis David went into Pitt's studio a few days after the assassination and saw Pitzer with a movie editing machine. And it was a movie film, according to David, of the autopsy. And he also has the slides of the autopsy. Now, this film was never surfaced. And what was interesting about this case is that Pitzer himself apparently committed suicide in October 1966, just before he was due to leave the Navy and take up a job in a television studio, where he was about to help make a documentary on his knowledge of the JFK assassination. So this is just one of those intriguing stories, and it may never be resolved because the film is gone and Pitzer is gone and Dennis David is also no longer with him, unfortunately. This is just a picture of Skip in his office in 1963. That's not where he did his drawings, that's just like his desk. Right, this is a picture of Skip getting a letter of commendation a couple of weeks after he did the drawings from Stover. And this is a scan of the actual letter. As I said earlier, you can all have a look, and that's the actual letter that you can see on the screen. There's many of the other slides I'm going to show you, which you can have a look at, but that's the original letter, complete with, I don't know, coffee stains or whatever they are. But the interesting part is the second paragraph. And I've highlighted the thing I want to point out. In this letter he says, the illustrations thus produced most accurately depicted the situation required and immeasurably assisted the medical presentation. What the situation required was, I'll leave you to come to a conclusion about that. This is Skip and three other guys who received an award of Outstanding Young Men of America, which was in 1967. Right. This is from the sort of in-house newspaper that they published at the hospital, where it states that Skip actually wrote a complete medical illustration training manual because one didn't exist. He wrote a 600-page manual with 200 of his drawings, and this is like sort of the standard training manual. It took him 4 years to do, and he completed it in 1967. This is Skip in his office again. This is around about 67, 68, and that's one of his students on the left there. Now she's interesting because she was the first Waves medical illustration student at school. Remember, this is mid-60s, so for women to get, it took a long time after that before women became, prominent in the workplace and so on. WAVE actually stands for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, which is like the American equivalent of the RENS, the Women's Royal Navy Service. Right, this was an article that was in the Navy Medical News about Rydberg, and it's really about two of his students. That's D. Bolshiglio again, and another student, Lee Wask. This was taken photographed in 1968. Now Lee Wask is interesting because he did a drawing, which I've never seen before, of the morgue of Bethesda. They drew this in 1968, so it may have changed slightly from the autopsy, what it was like during the autopsy of Kennedy. But you can see the sort of gallery area on the left, and the two sort of gurneys, or whatever you call them, where the autopsy took place. Paul O'Connor, who was at the autopsy, did this drawing in 1992, and it shows you how where the coffin came in on the left, and it was a shipping casket, not the ornate casket that was actually Kennedy was put in and taken on board Air Force One. It was a grey metal box, and it was placed against the one with the autopsy table on the right, and that's where the autopsy was performed, and the actual embalming took place on the other table. This is a drawing that Rydberg did in 2003. Now, he wasn't at the autopsy, so he just drew this from memory. So he places Hume's thing on, at least he had the correct table where the autopsy actually took place. Right, in 1968, Skip was due to leave the Navy, and he wanted letters of recommendation from Boswell and Humes. He wrote this letter to Boswell and an identical letter to Humes asking for recommendations. He got a reply from Humes, and again this is the actual letter that Humes sent him. It said, "With great pleasure that I write to you, express my gratitude and appreciation for your excellent service to me and my associates in the field of medical illustration." And he goes on to mention that it was for the autopsy of President Kennedy. This, just a blow up of the letter. This is the one he got from Boswell. Boswell was very unhappy. Boswell was a completely different character from Humes. Humes was a very very confident man, whereas Boswell wasn't very confident. He essentially let Humes do made all the decisions, and he just went along with him. But he wrote in this letter, "I continue to be somewhat circumspect about putting anything in writing or discussing this due to continuing controversy." He couldn't bring himself to actually mention the fact that Skip did these drawings, which was, I think, it's quite remarkable, the difference between the two letters.
Doesn't even refer to what it is there.
These are just some newspaper articles that appeared after the drawings were done, showing what Skip did during his career. This particular one on the left is just about him generally, and then he articles started to appear about Skip's doubt about how accurate his drawings were. I mean, for example, the one on the left, it said the illustrator had second thoughts about the Kennedy assassination, and he was starting to get sort of pretty unsure about, you know, having his name on an historical document, which was inaccurate. There's a few more. Now this is a bit interesting. This is an article that appeared in Hustler magazine in May of 1984. That particular month he did the guest editorial and he wrote about his experiences doing these drawings. And that caught the eye of one of the early researchers, Paul Hock, and that began a exchange of letters. And I've actually got the original letters again in this folder if you want to see them. And Paul Hock, you know, was very interested in what Skip did. And he wrote to him on a number of occasions, trying to get sort of information and Skip's views of what he did. That's just the first letter that Hock wrote to Rydberg. Some more newspaper articles that appeared in, but these are all in local newspapers. Skip was working in North Carolina at the time, so this didn't get national, certainly didn't get international coverage. But nothing come of it. He tried to get access to the drawings, but nothing was going to. None of these articles and his publicity was any help to it at the time. A few more there. Right, beginning in 1970, when he was art director and medical illustrator at the University of Alabama, he started writing to various powerful Washington politicians in an effort to get permission to see the original autopsy photos and x-rays. That's a picture of the University of Alabama. Just a sort of a comment I want to make. If you see the lamppost between the two front doors, nothing to do with Rydberg, but the door on the left, that's where George Wallace stood when he was trying to prevent Vivian Malone and James Hood from entering. Fortunately, he failed. Nothing to do with Skip, but I thought that might be quite interesting. Right, he wrote to, this is in 1970, he wrote to John Chaffee, who was Nixon's Secretary of the Navy at the time. Now Chaffee didn't reply. This guy did, because he sent a copy of the letter to him as well, and he basically all he did was say, look, I'm sure that the Secretary will be carefully consider the matter that you've raised. But he didn't hear anything. There was no return. Now this was a reply from John Sparkman, who was the chairman of the Committee on Banking and Currency, quite one of the powerful members of the Senate. And again, thank you very much for your letter. I'll see what I can do for you. Nothing come of that. He wrote to Nixon, and he got a reply. It was sent to Joseph Grimes at the Department of the Navy, and he talked basically about what happened to the illustration, and effectively he wrote at the end that no further information is available that could be of any assistance to. So he was just up against this brick wall every time, you know, no one seemed to be able to help it. He wrote to Ted Kennedy and got a predictable response. One of his assistants wrote back and said, unfortunately, we are not able to assist you. But, you know, it was worth a try, I suppose. Now, during this time, he was in contact with Professor Latimer at the Department of Neurology at Columbia University. He did a series of pamphlets. Now, he supported the single bullet theory and the lone assassin and so on. Skip didn't agree with him, but they were in correspondence with each other. Again, this is a scan of the original letter that you received from Latimer. At least he did say, I'm sorry if some of our colleagues, in other words, some of the medical people and so on, have given you a hard time because it was not your fault. That's the only one of the few people that actually recognised that it wasn't his fault that these drawings are inaccurate. He wrote to Jimmy Carter and he got a reply from Harold Pinkett of the General Service Administration, and now this was starting to get interesting because he said, why don't you contact Burt Marshall, who's the Kennedy family representative? He was very helpful because he gave gave Skip Marshall's address. So try him, because he's a chap you really need to get permission from to see these pictures. In the meantime, he got a letter from the Surgeon General, Vice Admiral Aronson, relinquishing from that the document he signed, the secrecy document he signed back in the 60s. But he was talking about it anyway. He basically ignored that document he signed. But this was officially saying that he could. If he was called before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, they're quite happy for him to tell them what he witnessed or what he saw. But he was never called anyway. Right, here's a couple of letters he received back from Marshall. The one on the right is the interesting one. It's the final letter he got, because he was on the verge of giving Skip permission, but he put this restriction on him. He said, you can't reproduce these autopsy materials by drawings or otherwise. So the reason for you wanting these drawings will be negated, because you're not allowed to do it. So effectively, he was saying, yes, you can have them, but you can't really have them because you can't do what you wanted to do with them. So he never got permission to see them. He wrote to Gerardo Rivera in 1980. Now, you remember, he was the guy on whose TV show the Zapruder film was shown in 75. Well, by 1980, he wasn't particularly interested in the Kennedy assassination, and they weren't interested in doing an item on their programme about Skip's experience. So they essentially said, at this time, we're not interested. Thank you very much for writing. So they got nowhere. Anyway, in October 1988, he was working here at the University of North Carolina in their School of Medicine, in the Medical Illustration Department, when, remember this is 1988, 20 years after he left the Navy, and who should walk into his office unannounced? James Humes, the autopsy service. He hadn't seen him for nearly 20 years. Skip had written an article, you saw them in the previous slides, and Humes read one of these articles, and he thought, well, I'm going to look up Skip, and I'm going to, basically put it straight. So, there's no problem there. Everything is correct in the Warren Commission. They went to this. Oh, by the way, he gave him a business card while he was at when he met him, and this is the actual card. Humes was working in Chicago for the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. And there's some handwriting on the back of it, and the name of a doctor and an address. Now, I think that's Humes' handwriting. I'm not sure. I can't say that with any real authority, but I believe that is his handwriting. Anyway, they went to a restaurant, this restaurant in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And Chapel Hill is actually owned essentially by the university. They own a huge sort of complex of buildings, and they actually owned this restaurant. And he was at this restaurant, and he was talking to Humes about the autopsy and about the Warren Commission and so on. And Humes didn't give anything away. Humes still bolstered the Warren Commission story. But Skip knew Humes. Skip went to Humes' wedding. Stover went to it, Boswell went to it. He knew the guy. And Skip told me that in the Navy, in the medical section of the military, rank doesn't matter. Doesn't matter very much. You're all medical personnel, and the fact that you're a higher rank doesn't really carry any real weight. You socialise, and you sort of knew each other much more. The sort of the hierarchy wasn't so sort of fixed. But he knew Humes, knew him quite well, and Humes had a way of telling you something, but also looking at you in a certain way, just to say, well, that's not actually the truth, but that's all I'm going to say. In other words, he kept it back, and he knew that there was something that Humes wanted to say to him, but he couldn't say it. Humes was sworn to secrecy. Humes was a military man, and he did what his commander-in-chief, what Johnson wanted him to do, and that was bolster the Warren Commission's verdict that he was a lone assassin. But he could tell, Skip looked at him, and he knew that there was something he desperately wanted to say, but he was unable to say it. But by the way, Humes paid the bill, so a bit of justice there, I think, perhaps. This was a card that Rydberg gave me about 10 years ago. After
Very hairy
recent one.
Vitruvian man.
Sorry?
It's a very hairy Vitruvian man.
Yeah. Anyway, just a few photographs taken throughout Skip's military career. I looked at the bottom one and I thought, that to me looks like he's an extra from the musical South Pacific. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me telling you that. Anyway, that's just that's one of the most recent photographs when he was in the Navy, in the US Army Reserve on the left there. Right, I met Skip in Dallas in 2003 where we gave a joint presentation at the Lancer Conference. And this is just a couple of photographs taken after he'd given his presentation when he was talking to the members of the audience. But although he was 63 at the time, he was always learning, you know, and he was graduated in October 2004 and got his master's degree in forensic pathology, which I think is amazing. You know, the guy was just sort of, his thirst for knowledge was incredible. That was quite a recent, that was in 2006. Again, it was a local newspaper in Venison, Florida, written by George McGinn. If you do a Google for George McGinn and Skip Rydberg, you can actually read this article online. Right, I'm going to let Skip have the final word. This is Skip extract from his Lancer presentation in 2003. Just let you hear what it has to say.
I'm also on my master's in criminal investigative psychology and intend to jump to the PhD where I intend to give a vasectomy to the Warren Commission because that's my master's, that's my PhD. I'm going to straighten factually all that's available to me to do. I'm doing this because of my name being on part of history that's not accurate, and having communities to try to straighten it out. And for my 3 children, for grandchildren and the world. So let's go.
Clearly he was still very, very emotional about having this document that with his name on it that he wanted corrected. He never managed to do it, unfortunately, because he died in July last year. And shortly before he died, he sent me, as I say, these documents. He sent me a huge box that weighed about 20 pounds, sent it through the post, full of his entire research documents. And he sent me these, and I was very, very pleased to get them. But now I realise why he sent me them. He wanted me to be the custodian of his work because he knew he was dying. Now, I received these about May, it was May last year, and I'm honoured and privileged to be the custodian. Okay, that's it. Has anybody got any questions?
I say, there are not many people of integrity in this business, in this whole Warren Commission and medical investigation, police investigation, everything, but he's one of them who's got it.
I totally agree. Yeah, there aren't many heroes that come out of this thing, and I think he's one of them.
And yet he was in a comparatively powerless position where he couldn't do anything about it. And he was one of those who could literally be ordered to keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you confine to... Sorry. Can you play back that bit where you, someday someone may compare the films with the artist's drawing? Can you put that back on so I can get the full
First,
quote?
one of the first slides. Extra slide. Maybe number 3. Scroll on the left. We'll be near the top.
Right.
Further up. Yeah,
Right.
that's the one.
Not that one.
No,
It's,
so it's above
It's
this.
the one above, I think, just slightly.
No, 2 above, yeah.
Yeah, okay, hold on. Substantially.
Yeah, Barry, I was going to ask, did he confide to you what his theories was?
What
He
is
must
there?
have, well, he must have wondered what really did happen. Did he ever try and find out?
But he did research. He researched it for 40 years, over 40 years. He actually believed that Oswald did fire from the book depository. Now, I don't agree with him. I thought many of us won't, but he does believe there was another shooter firing from probably the grassy knoll. But he got no more insight than anybody else that's researched this case. He thinks that the FBI was involved, Johnson was involved, the CIA was involved. He doesn't know. He just based it on other people's work. You know, he has no actual insight. He doesn't have any personal knowledge. He did say to me that going back to the photo I showed you of Bethesda, that there was talk that night of a decoy ambulance. He doesn't know, but there was sort of general talk that there was a decoy ambulance to put the press off. So there was an ambulance driving around the back of the hospital to try and throw the press off. So you know there are lots of stories about what took place in the morgue and all these different caskets that were coming in. The body was taken out of one casket, put back in another, and all kinds of shenanigans that were going on, which he obviously was not privy to. But you know, he, as I say, he has his theories. He did have his theories in his book. Did I bring the book with me? I might have. The Head of the Dog. Now he wrote The Head of the Dog in a form of a novel. So he's putting words into people like Hoover and Johnson, put words into their mouths, obviously. So he made those words up. But he thinks that the FBI, the CIA, Johnson, the mafia, they're all working together to assassinate.
I was there in 2003. Right at the end, he mumbled something when he was getting emotional. And I'm sure he mentioned Johnson and Marcello right at the end.
He did. He did. His last words at the end of the conference. This was 2003.
Yeah.
Remember, George W. had just been elected. He said, I think the words he said, one man killed for it and another man stole it. Basically, he believed Johnson killed to get the presidency,
Yeah.
and he believed that Bush stole the election, basically, with the dispute over the votes of the
Yeah,
Florida.
those are completely separate issues. I think those are separate issues.
They are separate issues, of course they are, yeah. Anyway, that's basically Skip's story.
Barry, was Skip's
Sorry, could you speak up?
Skip's views on Ida Docks?
He thought she was an incredible medical illustrator. In fact, it's very interesting because he did write to Ida Docks, explaining what he did. He wrote a glowing letter, which I don't think I've got that particular letter here, but he wrote a letter to her saying that he was very impressed by her work for the House Select Committee, and he wanted to know what her views were, and he wanted to know why she was chosen and what she thought about it. But I don't think she replied to him. In fact, I actually wrote to Ida Docks 2005, I think. I sent her a copy of the journal, of the original article I wrote about Skip Rydberg, explaining why I wanted to talk to her. I sent that to her, and I managed to get her on the phone. Which
You were lucky.
Yeah, I got her on the phone, but that was all I did. I told her I told her, did you get my letter? Did you get the magazine, the journal I sent? She said, yes. I said, are you prepared to talk to me about what you did? And she said, no.
No, a friend of mine doorstepped her, and
Oh, right.
yeah, and the answer was, we do not speak of these things. We do not
Well, she
speak
didn't.
of these things. And the door went bang.
She didn't say those, but she didn't put the phone down with me.
Yeah.
You know, she just said, no, I'm not going to talk about it. And I wrote a follow-up letter asking her, look, you know, thank you very much for talking to me. If you do change your mind, please get in touch with me. But she never did. I don't know whether she spoke to anybody, to be honest.
No,
I don't
it
think
doesn't
she
look
did.
like it.
But that's an interesting, yeah, he was very impressed with her. Thought she was a brilliant medical administrator. And she was. But it would be interesting to know whether what restrictions were put on her when she did her drawing. Because she apparently she was given a few photographs which were basically tracings. They were published by the House Select Committee as being exact renditions of the photographs. Well, why didn't they publish the photographs?
Yeah, exactly.
If they're exactly the same as the photographs. You know, it's like a sort of a, you know, we can't do it, you know, we've got to keep these things hidden. So, anyway, that's basically it. But before I go, I want to do something else. It'll only take me a couple of minutes, and I've got to find it now. Since 2013, I've been doing tributes to Kennedy here and here in Canterbury and also in London. Well, I'm not going to do a long-winded one today. I'm going to let JFK speak for himself, actually. I managed to get hold of the 3-volume edition of the public papers of John F. Kennedy. And I was reading in volume 3 for 1963, and I came across a transcript of some remarks he made in April 10th actually, in 1963. There was a group of foreign economics students visiting the United States to study American business practices. And he welcomed them to the White House, and he gave them, talked to them, gave a few remarks in the Rose Garden, and it was the concluding remarks that I read that really made me sit up, and I found them to be very, very poignant, considering what happened a few months later. So I'm going to let you read and listen to Kennedy say the last remarks.
So we're very glad to have you here. I'm confident I'm talking to a number of future prime ministers, presidents, and others. And I just want you to know that when you visit in that role, decade hence, and the Kennedys are long gone, that I'm sure you'll be equally welcome. Thank you.
I don't think I can add anything to that. Thank you all very much. Thank you.